For a lot of gardeners, August feels like the end of garden season, but for the rest of us, it's time to get those seeds out and prepare for our fall garden. Because while some gardeners are pulling plants out, this is actually one of the best times of the year to start growing again. And even if you don't plan to have a fall garden, it's a good time to think about cover crops that'll be a great benefit to next year's garden. So today we're going to talk about what crops you can plant in August, which ones to direct sow, and which to start indoors, and a few things that you can do to ensure that you have a successful fall garden. Plus, we're going to talk about one thing that you can plant to improve next year's garden. So let's get started. There's one thing that you absolutely need to know when planting your fall garden, and that is when your first frost date is. You want to look up the first frost date for your growing zone. I'm in zone 8B, and so we have a long growing season here. If you're in a zone with a shorter growing season, it's important to adjust accordingly and remember that these are average frost dates and not guarantees, but they're still the best place to start when you're planting your fall garden. So most seed packets will, list on the back the number of days to maturity. So if your first frost is, say, mid-October, then you don't want to plant something that has 120 days till maturity. So let's start with some fast winners that have short maturity days, so they're likely to produce before the first frost in many different zones. The first one is radishes, because radishes typically have a maturity date of somewhere between 22 and 35 days, so it makes it a quick, easy crop. And of course, you have things like arugula, lettuce, bok choy, mustard greens. All of these typically take less than 50 days. Spinach and turnip greens might take up to 60. Beets, Swiss chard, bush beans, um, cilantro, those can take anywhere between 50 and 65 days. Carrots are going to be somewhere around 80, and parsley takes a little longer, usually up to 90 days. All of the crops I just mentioned can be direct sown. And so let's recap real quick, and I'll put all the crops that I just went over on the screen with the typical maturity dates. And keep in mind that these are just average dates to maturity. So you want to check your package because it can vary from variety to variety. So the direct sown crops are radishes, arugula, lettuce, bok choy, mustard greens, spinach, turnip greens, and beets, Swiss chard, bush beans, depending on your area, cilantro, dill, carrots, and parsley. And even though you can direct sow these crops, keep in mind that the summer heat is still hard on them. So there's 4 mistakes that I find that gardeners typically make when they're planting in August. The first mistake is forgetting to keep the seeds moist during the hot weather. In August, the top inch of soil can dry out surprisingly fast. And since most vegetable seeds are planted shallowly, then that thin layer has to stay consistently moist until they germinate. And of course, the second mistake is planting in full afternoon sun without providing some sort of temporary shade. Most of these crops are very heat sensitive, so covering with a 40% shade cloth can make a world of difference. You don't need to shade them forever, just long enough to help them get established. The third mistake is not providing fresh mulch to keep that moisture in and to lower the soil temperature, because even an inch or two of straw or shredded leaves can noticeably reduce the soil temperature and slow evaporation. So the fourth and probably the most important mistake is assuming that the first frost date is the only thing that matters. And what I mean by that is that people start planning their fall garden and they think, well, my first frost date is October 31st. And carrots take about 70 days to maturity. So I've got plenty of time. But you have to consider that the days are growing shorter and shorter. So by September and early October, crops aren't growing nearly as fast as they were, say, in June. The soil is still warm, which helps, but the fewer hours of daylight each day will naturally slow down plant growth. So for fall crops, adding 1 to 2 weeks to the listed days to maturity is a good practice. And it's not an exact formula, it's just a rule of thumb. The other side is that some crops tolerate or even improve after a light frost. So for crops like kale and cabbage, spinach, Brussels sprouts, carrots, turnip greens, and mustard greens, the frost is, well, it just may not be the end. So many gardeners actually prefer harvesting some of these, after a light frost because the cooler temperatures can actually improve their flavor. So now let's talk about crops that need to be started indoors and when to transplant them. So broccoli, cabbage, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, and kale are more likely to be successful if they're started indoors and transplanted when the time is right. This is one of the hardest things for new fall gardeners to understand because these cool season crops actually need to be transplanted while it's still hot outside. And so if you wait until it feels like broccoli weather, well, you've probably waited too long. It feels backwards, but you're growing them through the heat so that they'll mature during the cool weather that they actually prefer. So a good practice is to count backwards from your average frost date using the days to maturity for your variety. And then add another week or two because plants grow slowly in the fall. So the mature plant loves cool weather, but the transplant can survive August heat if you help it get established. And if possible, transplant in the evening or on a cloudy day to help reduce the transplant shock. You want to water deeply after you plant and mulch to keep the roots cool and provide temporary shade and keep the soil consistently moist for the first week or two. The first week is the most critical because once the roots begin growing into the surrounding soil, plants become much more resilient. So once you finish harvesting a bed, or if you're not planning to plant a fall garden, then I highly recommend planting a cover crop. Something like red clover or vetch, buckwheat or rye. Each has its different strengths depending on your goals. Some add nitrogen and some build organic matter and others, protect the soil. Cover crops keep something growing that benefits your garden instead of leaving the soil bare. One thing that I'm trying this year is a commercial mustard as a cover crop. It's been studied for helping suppress certain diseases in the soil and certain pests. And I'll be making a separate video showing exactly how I'm going to be using it and what the benefits are. I'm excited to see how it performs in a home garden, and we'll just see what happens. But vegetables aren't the only thing that you can plant this month. So we can't forget about the flowers. Our pollinators need those flowers. So you want to plant things like fall asters and mums, and come October, you'll have this beautiful riot of color in your garden. And then, of course, there's perennials like black-eyed Susans. And August is the peak time to dig up and divide or to plant irises for next spring because the warm soil helps the roots establish before winter arrives. So let me know in the comments if you're planning to plant a fall garden and what's the one crop that you never skip. So before I go, I have another garden challenge for you. So take a look at this bug and tell me, is it a friend, a foe, or something in between? If you said a foe, then you're right. This is a striped cucumber beetle. It's easy to recognize by its yellow body and the 3 black stripes. This little pest is a major problem for cucumbers, squash, melons. It causes damage to roots, to leaves, to the fruit, and it'll spread bacterial wilt. If you enjoyed this video and want more practical gardening tips every week, I'd love to have you join our growing gardening community. So until next time, happy gardening.